Hey y'all, welcome to Sandy's Library. I'm Sandy, and in this video we're going to talk about my great-grandpa Willie's 5th marriage to Mattie Tullos. These are old family tales about my grandmother's people. If you need visuals, there are links posted in the description outlining both of my grandparents' family trees. So, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so, in our last video, Willie has finally gotten rid of Winnie the Nightmare, and for good. After all that, one would think that Willie was done with wives, but oh no. See, while Willie's still trying to get out from under the nightmare known as Winnie back in 1932, he moves to a farm near Chatham. And based on their genealogical notes, I think the reason was that this farm had a more solidly constructed house. I'm guessing, but that's what we're going to go with because it's the only thing that makes sense. The farm had once belonged to Ben Carpenter, but had since passed to his son Will, who was now married to Willie's daughter, Sally. Once Willie moved into the farmhouse, Sally wanted him to hire a housekeeper. Yeah, at this point, a housekeeper is way better than a wife. Unless you're W.L. Williams, of course. Leave it to Willie to try to marry the housekeeper. As the story goes, some of Mattie Tullos Cooper's relatives saw Willie's ad in the newspaper for a housekeeper. Mattie was a widow in her 30s with a toddler and no means of support. Mattie applied for the position and was hired on the spot in 1932. And remember, y'all, Willie's divorce from Winnie wasn't final until 1934. Mattie and her young daughter, Katie Lou, who was 3 or 4 at the time, moved to the farm near Chatham where Mattie began keeping house. The interesting bit that I find in all this is that our half-cousin never once mentions or seems to notice that Willie's got himself a housekeeper while he's trying to get rid of Winnie by divorce, and that on the same day that he's granted a divorce from Winnie, April 7th, 1934, is the same damn day that he marries Mattie Tullos Cooper. Willie was 65 and Mattie was 39. Willie's son, Bud, performed the ceremony. Willie's 5th wife, 6th if you count May Raymond, which I don't because there wasn't a ceremony, but anyway, Mattie Geneva Tullos Cooper Williams was definitely Willie's last wife. Mattie was born April 11th, 1895. Our half-cousin doesn't say where, though. I checked the 1900 and 1910 censuses, and it looks like her family lived in Jackson and Bienville parishes. Her former husband, Joseph Milton Cooper, died in Sicily Island, Louisiana, prior to the birth of their only child, Katie Lou. After a quick online search, I found that Joseph Milton Cooper died in 1928. So Katie Lou had to have been born in 1928 or 29, depending upon when in 1928 Joseph died, if she was his daughter. Hey y'all, I don't take nothing for granted without DNA results to back it up. Not anymore. So anyway, in 1935, Willie moves back to his farm in West Ouachita Parish, bringing with him his new bride and stepdaughter. Our half-cousin says, by all accounts, Willie and Mattie were happy during the early years of their marriage, and that It wasn't until Willie became aged and infirmed that Mattie became unhappy. Okay, firstly, y'all, Willie was already aged when he married Mattie. He was 65. They married in 1934. Willie had his stroke in 1936. So they didn't have many early years together before Mattie had to start playing nursemaid. And secondly, I have no stories about Mattie from my grandmother and her sisters. I knew that Willie had a wife when he died, but nobody ever really talked about her. Now I'm kind of getting a clue why. I believe that this part of the tale in our half-cousin's manuscript is mostly his rose-colored glasses view of Mattie. I'm seeing that our half-cousin had a very simplistic yet unrealistic view of adult kinds of things. Our half-cousin is gone now, and I don't mean to disparage him. But as far as I know, he never had a girlfriend or a boyfriend throughout the entire course of his life. He was in his early 50s when he died. And based on his manuscript, he seems to believe that Mattie loved Willie until Willie started to age and become infirmed. Like I said before, Willie was already aged when they married. It's more likely, y'all, that Mattie saw Willie as an easy ride who'd be dead in a few years, and that'd leave her the widow of Willie's estate. That's what I believe happened. The story that our half-cousin includes in support of his theory was supposed to come from my grandmother, but that doesn't make sense either. Our half-cousin reports that Sissy said this to Mattie before the wedding. Now, first off, when were they all supposedly talking about this with Mattie? When exactly did Willie go to my grandparents and say, "I'm going to marry Mattie"? When did that happen? While he was still married to Winnie? I don't think so. Remember, Willie's divorce from Winnie was granted on the same day that he married Mattie. I find it incredibly hard to believe that my grandmother would ever consider talking about another marriage for her father when Willie was still married to the last wife. But here we are. Our half-cousin reports that Sissy said she told the housekeeper, "Now, Mattie, you know he's old and he's got a big family. We're all going to want to visit him, and you may not want to cook for us or have us around. I want to be sure that you know all about it and understand that we will want to visit." Okay, so that's all fine and well, except that Mattie's been living as his maid for 2 years. These are all things that everybody already knows. Plus, my grandmother never was shy about walking into somebody else's kitchen and taking over. She wouldn't have cared if Mattie wanted her to cook or not. And to be honest, Sissy would have been happier if Mattie didn't, so she'd go in and do it herself. This conversation between my grandmother and Mattie just does not ring true to me. Nevertheless, either Aunt Allie in her 1980 interview or our half-cousin was using my grandmother to shore up this story. Our half-cousin says that Mattie understood the situation and treated the Williams family as her own. He also stated that after Katie Lou graduated from high school, Mattie sent her to LSU in Baton Rouge. And I'd just like to point out that if Mattie sent Katie Lou to college, she did it with money that Willie's farm provided, because, remember, Mattie didn't have any money. So anyway, everything's honky-dory in the last paragraph of our half-cousin's manuscript, but in the next, Mattie is worried about her financial security. And she's afraid that Willie's children might dupe her out of her share of the estate when Willie dies. So, what happened between the paragraph where everything was sunshine and roses and Mattie has accepted the Williams family as her own, and the next paragraph where she doesn't trust the Williams children at all? Our half-cousin states, Mattie was aware of the bitter dispute that had occurred over the previous property settlement. Huh? What bitter dispute? And what property settlement is he talking about? There was no property settlement with Winnie beyond the initial $350 that Willie gave her before she burned down the house. So what property settlement is our half-cousin talking about? God, this guy is killing me. But back to the story. It's reported that Mattie began pressuring Willie in hopes of securing her part of the estate prior to his death. Supposedly, she wanted Willie to sell, but he refused, saying, Mattie, if I sell, you'll only get part of it. My kids have worked too hard for this place. I'm keeping it for them. When I die, they can do whatever they want with it. So, since Willie won't sell, the next thing Mattie does is she persuades him to sell the oil leases on his land. I guess maybe she thought she could get some money out of that if he died. I don't know. But honestly, y'all, I feel like if any of Willie's wives were anything akin to a gold digger, Mattie is the one who fit the bill. She knew what she was getting when she roped Willie into marrying her. I mean, remember, she was his housekeeper for 2 years before they married. Plus, what 39-year-old woman marries a 65-year-old man, if not for what she can get when he dies? Nevertheless, the agreement was made on April 9th, 1935, between the Williams family and C.M. Johnson. Our half-cousin's notes are really unclear, but here's what I think was happening. The Williams family leased the oil and gas rights to Johnson for $14. There was at least 140 acres involved and possibly as much as 280. The lease was for 5 years. However, if drilling operations did not begin by June 18th, 1936, then the lease would terminate if Johnson did not pay the Williams family $140. On July 27th, 1936, C.M. Johnson released the rights back to the Williams family. So, I'm thinking, no harm, no foul, right? Well, our half-cousin says, and I quote, Willie became worried and upset over these matters. It was thought that stress had caused Willie to have a stroke, from which he never recovered, causing his health to deteriorate. Okay, so, I don't get it. Willie sold the oil leases to please Mattie. The rights were returned a little over a year later. Why did this cause him stress? It wasn't like he was going to lose any of his land or anything. That's what mattered to Willie, leaving his land to his kids. I feel like there's more to the story, but unfortunately I've never heard it before. Like I said, I knew Mattie existed, but nobody ever talked about her. And now I'm getting an inkling why. And I'm going to tell y'all all about it in the next video. So, stay tuned. Later, Gators.